Hi, thank you. So I doubt I have to tell you that we have youth suffering at alarming, and some studies indicate increasing rates. And there are many professions who this is likely to never affect, and yours is not one of them. In fact, in our field, we see youth ministers as front line for early identification, referral to treatment for kids who are suffering from depression, anxiety, and other mental illness, and then hopefully sources of support, of love, of guidance, and getting these kids help that they need. So next month, Nadja and I will be talking to you about what depression is, what you should be looking for, and then maybe most importantly, what can you do? What can you do to help? Where do you go for support? And then we'll be opening it up to you for questions, obviously, and we will be talking about the Break Free program that Skip just mentioned, which really looks at adolescent depression and suicidality from an adolescent's point of view, which we can certainly talk more about next month. But I'm looking forward to being here, and thank you very much.
And Aracelis Vasquez-Hay is known to many of you. She is a Yale Divinity School grad and has gone on to, as common for Yale Divinity School grads, an exemplary and exciting career as a youth minister and children's educator at her church in New London, as a chaplain for Connecticut College, and as a member of the New London Board of Education. Aracelis will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. It is with great joy and honor to welcome our speaker for the day, the Reverend Dr. Lillian Daniel. As I shared with her earlier, welcome home, welcome back. I believe that today's topic will definitely begin to stir some things up, specifically for those of us who work directly with youth. And I will encourage you to take notes and be ready for some Q&A after our time with Dr. Daniel. I want to just share some stuff regarding her work and who she is. And she's a pastor, a writer, and a teacher. She has served as the senior minister of the First Congregational Church of Glen Ellen since 2004. Her book, When Spiritual But Not Religious Is Not Enough, Seeing God in Surprising Places, Even in the Church, is a provocative case for why religious community matters. She also co-authored This Odd and Wondrous Calling, The Public and Private Lives of Two Ministers with Martin B. Copenhaver. And she is also the author of her first book, Tell It Like It Is, Reclaiming the Practice of Testimony. And, you know, I'm sure she's done much more work, and it is truly a pleasure in having her be with us today. So I'm going to ask that you join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Lillian Daniel.
Will you pray with me? Gracious God, we ask that you bless our time together and open our hearts and minds to your holy presence. Allow us to learn and grow in you, our God. Amen. So it's kind of like a running joke at my church at home among the staff that I'm here talking about youth ministry. Because there are, people at church who know a lot more about it than I do. And it's not something I've been a specialist in, but I have learned that that doesn't matter in a sense, because youth ministry is ministry, and I'm a pastor, and we're all everybody's pastor. And that's kind of one of the things I want to begin by saying is that the best youth ministers I know are experts at dealing with adults, and it's a real misconception to think that the job is about dealing with young people. It's about dealing with everybody, and to have a great program, you're dealing with adults around budget issues and people who have no vested interest in the program or who are at a different life stage, and you've got to deal with the church council, and you've got to negotiate, and you've got to recruit volunteers and leaders, and you're always working with adults, right? And it's also wrong to think that a senior minister doesn't interact with youth. I mean, the senior minister is everybody's pastor. And I know that a lot of senior ministers don't live that out. I get that. But to me, it's absurd. And if you put it this way, imagine if a senior minister were to say something like, I don't deal with people in their 50s. Like, we need to get somebody who's 50 years old to minister to those people. Because that's just like not my calling. It never has been. I've never really liked people in their 50s very much. I don't really understand them. Like, it's just like, but I have so much respect for anybody who is willing to go in there and minister to people in their 50s, because you know what? People in their 50s are the future of the church. So, obviously that's ridiculous, right? But of course, we've all heard people talk like that about youth, as though like youth are some other species or something. And of course, we're all different at different ages, but yeah, it would be as absurd as saying, I won't deal with retired people, or I won't be the minister to single people because I don't understand that, or I won't be the minister to married people. You can't say that about any other group, and yet people talk like that, right? So I consider myself to be in youth ministry, and I'm in like all different ages of ministry. And yet, having said all that, there are ways in which people specialize and bring gifts. And so I wanted to begin also by saying, here's why I didn't understand that before. And that's something that I've learned over the last 20 years of being a pastor. And I'm sort of ashamed to say it, but I want to acknowledge it up front, that when I was in Divinity school, I made a point of not learning anything about youth ministry. I didn't want an internship that involved it. I distanced myself from it. I didn't take a class on education. I didn't want anything about children or teenagers, none of that. Why was that? Why do you think? Exactly. Thank you, Rebecca. Because, and 21 years ago, that's what it felt like, that there were two tracks, and if you thought you wanted to be a senior minister, there was this other completely different track that often seemed to be a female track, right? I even thought of it as girl job and boy job, And also add to that I talked about this in the sermon this morning, but when I went to YDS, it was the height of the second career student. The average age was 39, right? And I show up and I'm 22, and I'm female, and I'm also blonde and small. And, there were a lot of sort of forces out there, and everybody else is like, oh, I've already been like a partner in a law firm, and I've already had this distinguished career as a scientist. And I'm like, I worked in a movie theater, and I did some babysitting. It felt, and it also felt like there was this model of the associate who specialized in youth and was female, and that was like Pastor Julie, and then there was like Dr. Smith, who's the senior minister and goes to the finance meetings and does all that, and congregations that seem to have this huge blind spot about that, like they'd say it's so wonderful that the kids at our church have male and female role models. Pastor Julie and, Dr. Smith. It's like, do you hear yourself, right? And so I was aware of all that, didn't really know what to do with it, but it seemed to me the answer was to say, I don't want to learn anything about youth, because everyone just presumed that was the track you were on. And in some ways, I was very fortunate to find a job that didn't require that in some ways, But I did, and I was a generalist, and then I worked at Cheshire out here for 3 years as an associate minister, and they had a staff of people who also did the education and youth stuff, so I didn't have to do that. And now I look back and say I didn't get to learn about that, but that was what was going through my mind, and I confess it. I wanted to distance myself from that because it felt like there were so many forces steering women toward that. And I hope that today we are in a different place, that the people who want to do that ministry get to choose it or follow a calling from God, and that we don't force people into roles based on that. But that's what I guarded against. And then I went from this thriving, large suburban church that had a great program for children and youth, and I took advantage of that by learning nothing about it, because, and then I go and take a small, struggling church, in New Haven as solo pastor. And guess what? I sure wish I had learned something about kids and youth, because you're doing everything, and if you don't know anything about that or care about that, how do you grow the church? And there was this attitude, it felt like at that time at city churches, like, well, everybody's going to take their kids to the suburban churches. And so people, churches can't have a strong kids program in the city, which is crazy, right? But that's kind of what we all said, and it was sort of like a way of justifying why we were small and shrinking, And it'd be as crazy when I look back on it as saying, in the city, you really can't do anything for people in their 50s. It's just like they're in the suburbs, It's as absurd as saying that, right? And so I figured out, we had to figure out something with kids. And so it was at that point that I started calling my colleagues who I'd worked with back in Cheshire and saying, how did you do that? And how did you pick curriculum? And would you come and work for me? Would you, my best volunteer, would you like to take a very, very part-time role and see if we could create and grow a Sunday school? I've got 2 children, so that doubles the population right there, and if I hire you for $5,000 and you bring one of your kids, we've already increased, massive amount, we can report that to the denomination, we've increased by 30% in 1 week. So yeah, and so that was the beginning of my re-education, where I said everybody has to understand this, and this is key. And I went to school, not like this school, but went to school of experience and asking people, what were all the things that I didn't pay attention to in my first job, and can you now help me understand that better? So fast forward, to give you a little context of where I am, I'm now back in the suburbs, right? I'm back in that strange world that I said I would never go back to. I was tortured to grow up in an affluent suburb outside D.C., Bethesda, Maryland, and I swore I would never, do that again. And then I ended up in Cheshire, Connecticut, which is another affluent suburb. And then, I was in New Haven at this wonderful Church of the Redeemer down the street, and felt a call to do something new. And 10 years ago, went out to Chicago, to the wealthy suburbs again, right? And to be honest, there were personal reasons for wanting to move to Chicago related to other people in the family, because apparently, God doesn't only talk to the minister about calling. I've tried to make that argument, but but apparently, other people's happiness matters too. And so I had personal reasons for seeking a call in Chicago, and what I hoped, because I loved my church in New Haven, and I loved the diversity of that congregation, and I loved where we were. I mean, it felt early to leave, But again, it wasn't all about me, right? And so I hoped to find a church that was just almost like the Church of the Redeemer, but maybe twice as many members and 4 times as much money, and I would have been satisfied with that. And there was nothing like that. Sometimes you just think that this calling is going to happen. I mean, the image I use a lot of times with calling is I'll go out to the parking lot after a late meeting at church, and I'm clicking to open my car, and it's not opening, and I'm getting really mad, and I'm about to kick the thing, and then I realize it's not my car. And I have to walk to the other side of the parking lot because there's a car that's I think sometimes that's how we are. So I was clicking outside of the car, I want a church just like the one I've got here, but, just a little easier. And that car wasn't opening because, my car was across the parking lot. And so what happened was, having begun my ministry career just terrified of the forces of sexism, in the church, so much so that I didn't learn about a particular area. Fast forward, it just happened that there were these large churches looking for heads of staff, and they were in these affluent suburbs, and I said, I'm not going to go there. I don't like those people, and they're small-minded and judgmental, and I'm a free thinker. I hate them, and so I'm not gonna go to the flesh pots of And as I kept getting encouraged in that direction by these well-meaning search committees, I finally realized that I was the one who was closed-minded, and that they were more open-minded than I was, and that maybe in ministry we're always in the mission field in somewhere. Like we don't always get to do ministry in the place we would choose to live. And I had that brief time in New Haven where I really did feel like those two aligned. Like, that's such an amazing thing when you think, I would actually choose to live here. And I would choose to go to church here, and I would this would align, right? But I think most ministry, you're not necessarily going somewhere you would choose to live. And so I kind of got my head around that and went out to the very, very Republican suburbs of Chicago. I thought everyone in Chicago would be liberal and stuff because Jesse Jackson was there, but apparently there's this whole thing called DuPage County, and my town in Glen Ellen is next to Wheaton College. Wheaton is the neighboring town, and all of a sudden, I moved from New England, where sort of the conversation partner was the cultured despisers of religion, right? Your conversation partner here is this spiritual but not religious. And I remember the Lutheran pastor across the street when I was here, did one of those studies and found out that everybody was happily unchurched. They weren't looking for a church. They felt really good about their decision. They'd put a lot of thought into it, a lot of research into whether they'd go to church, and they just felt great about the fact they didn't go to church. That's a different ethos. Then you go out to the Midwest, and the dominant ethos of church, though, is the megachurch. And the megachurch was birthed in the suburbs of Chicago. And, for me, the megachurch had always been a straw man in an argument. When I was trying to grow the Sunday school, I'd say, yeah, you can go to some megachurch. They have all these programs. But, our Sunday school is boutique, we'll really give your kid attention, You could go to the megachurch and get this, and that, but I'd never really experienced a megachurch. It was just a straw man. And suddenly, the competition is down the street. And that was such a different reality. And also the dominant ethos of Christianity was a very conservative version of it. I'm suddenly in the land of complementarianism. I mean, we didn't even know about that existed. That's this weird word that means you're a huge sexist and women can't do stuff, and they call it complementary. I mean, it's crazy. Does anyone get the irony of that? But they use it with a straight face, And it's just a very different ethos. And to be a woman senior minister in that environment was particularly strange. But as is always the case, the key thing was how do you grow and what do you do? And again, you can't ignore one group of people. When I started in Glen Ellen, everybody lives and dies by their youth programs in the Midwest. I mean, it's really it's not even questioned, right? And the youth sort of drive that. People choose where they want to live because the programs are great for the youth, and you got the baseball, and you got the park, and you got the church, and the church is just one more program, right? And it's one more benefit of going to this sort of expensive place to live, like a good school. You get a good church and has a thriving youth program. So heaven forbid you don't, because it's what are you doing? Throwing stink bombs at families when they walk in? How do you not have that, right? And there are certain churches that do that well. So in our situation, we were a high conflict church, and I found this out, more once I got there. And everybody I met in town, used to go to my church and would never go back. It's wow. It's we were the church with the troubles, And I thought, Northern Ireland has troubles. We're just a church, get over it. But I mean, there was high conflict, right? And but also very successful youth programs. And so not only were we hemorrhaging members because of fighting and conflicts, but also because the kids were choosing to go to other programs. And this is something that I think we miss all the time in multi-staff situations, sometimes where the senior minister doesn't care about this stuff, is that so many families choose their congregation because of where the youth feel good, And so you better care about that. And so they were choosing to go to these other programs. And I would say, that program is super fundamentalist, right? I mean, we're a United Church of Christ congregation. You know that your kid is going to a program where they're learning things that are sort of different from what we believe. And sure enough, the parents would come to me and say, oh, I'm so upset, like my kid thinks Jewish people are going to hell. I'm like, really? Did you not see that coming? Because, that's what they talk about. Like, they may be having a lot of fun there, but, that's what they're talking about. And like, you as a parent, do you care about these values? Or is it just where like little Johnny is wanting to go and having fun? Like, with little Johnny said, all my friends are like going down to the local bar and drinking. Well, yeah, like he feels really comfortable there. So, like, I just, I'm not sure I agree that he should be drinking at the bar at age 13. But, like so many of his friends go and they're just like a great group of kids. They're super supportive of each other. Like, really? Would you say that about other areas? Like, do you care about this stuff? Because it's one thing if it's just like a stylistic difference, but what if it's like fundamental stuff? So I really let the parents have it. And then my daughter started attending the youth group in question. I was like, are you kidding me, Abigail? She's like, well, all my friends go, and it's just like I feel really comfortable. I'm like, what? So I get it, right? And so it was then that I said, this has got to change. This has got to change. I can't just castigate the parents, because then I would look bad because my kid's going. We got to find somebody else to blame for this problem. And maybe it's us, right? Maybe it's us as a church. And so I went to the pastor in question who had the charismatic youth group that all the kids went to. And I said, like, what's your secret? Everyone says you have this kind of Pied Piper of a leader, and, who's like, oh, Jamie's so great, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll show you my secret. And he pulled out his church budget. And he said, look what we spend on this. Like, we hire people, and we pay them a good salary, and we value this. And he says, you think I don't know that I'm not getting, like, all the youth from your church and all these others? And he said, by the way, it doesn't necessarily translate into families coming. Sometimes it does. But he said, this is our gift to the community because we actually, like, care about youth ministry. And I was like, oh, you evil. We hate you people. I hate you with your intolerance and cruel views. It's like, yeah, we actually care about youth ministry. And he said, so I'm showing you this budget because I'd actually like for you to start doing it well, We kind of value this, And so then I could go back to my church and say, it's not a mysterious thing. It's not about a Pied Piper. It's about investing in it like you would invest in other things. And that was sort of a turning point for us. And then when we did get the funding together to do something and hire somebody, it's like, and let's not copy the really successful model that's being done all around us, but maybe try to do something that is fundamentally different and would, reach a different group of kids. Because maybe we ought to be able to say we care about youth ministry too. And I'm happy to say we became a church that attracts kids from all other congregations as well. And today I have a much more generous view of this, that and as I do of megachurches, actually, I believe that, we're all different branches of the family, and we all do different things well. And there are things that megachurches do so well that my church will never do well. And we have to really be generous about that. And we might say there are theological differences or other things, but you also have to kind of own up that we don't all do the same things well, and how do we dig in and do something beautiful for God? So when it came time to have a youth ministry, I didn't want it to be another sort of young life, right? There's so much of that in the community. And how could we reach a group of kids who perhaps weren't being reached? And so we became the sort of different youth group, as one of the kids said, we put the "by" in Bible. It was going to be a different kind of a group, right? And what is phenomenal is that when your youth group actually sort of represents the ethos of the whole congregation, a miraculous thing happens. The kids bring their families, but it's not like a bait and switch, And I think a lot of, and here I'll talk to kind of my own people in what I would say sort of like the mainline Protestant church. We have like upstairs in church this inclusivity and open-mindedness and bring your questions. And then downstairs with the kids, we're doing this like weird watered down fundamentalism. you know? And I saw that when I came to my church, and the first senior high Sunday and then the second, this was in the days we were struggling with the youth stuff, and they could get somebody to preach, sure, but what the kid would preach about was the life-changing conversion experience they had at summer camp somewhere else in a totally different tradition, right? And that's what you'd hear. Or they'd talk about the amazing youth group experience they had, but it wasn't at the church. Now, obviously God can be a part of all of that, but I was like Exhibit A right here. And also they were reflecting a sort of different ethos. And then when I sort of dug into it and started reading confirmation papers that were coming across my desk, and the kids were saying things like, I don't know if I really want to get confirmed or join the church because I don't believe the world was created in 6 days. And I'm like, who at our church told you that the world was created in 6 days, you know? Like we're not literalists upstairs. What's going on downstairs? So then I got into it with, and found out, like, people said, oh, well, children can't understand those things, I don't buy it. Like, kids naturally understand metaphor and mystery. It's the adults who get literal. And even, even in the elementary schools, I mean, you're doing metaphor in the 5th grade, like in a serious way. But then we've got 8th graders who are saying, I don't think I want to join the church because I don't think the world was literally created, in a week. I don't believe that Jonah actually lived in the belly of a whale. Like, who's telling them this, right? So part of it is like, how do you take that seriously and address that? And so I started telling the confirmands, if I read one paper that says, I don't believe the world was created in 6 days, like, I'm going to hand it back. Like, nobody told you that here, right? Because it turns out that actually they weren't just hearing that in Sunday school. There was nuance, right? But the cultural view of what it is to be a Christian is to be a fundamentalist. And as hard as we try in our churches to do metaphor and nuance and graciousness, even when we do that really well at every age, you're still going to have people say, I don't know if I want to get confirmed because I'm not a fundamentalist, because they still are getting that from the culture. And part of what happens is when your youth program grows, then you have like an influx of people come into the confirmation class, and you got these 8th graders, and you got one group of them who've been nurtured in this church, but then you got another group, wonderful, who've just come in from somewhere else, and they're reacting to a very different church. And then you've got another group who've had no church. And that's a group that we're seeing increasing numbers of in the youth category, are the so-called nuns, right? So there's great sociology being done, Nancy Ammerman, others. So I don't have to do any of that. I can just give you my hunches anecdotally. And I think this is a really big issue in youth ministry and every age, is what are we doing for the nuns, the ones who check off N-O-N-E, on the religion section. The largest, fastest growing group in America, 1 in 5, we'll check that off now, and 1 in 3 under 30. So we know that that's a growing group, right? And what are we doing to change what we do because of that? Because I think that the nuns fall in 4 categories. There are the no way, the no longer, the never have, and the not yet. So I think of the no ways as being like the angry baby boomer who has been injured by the church or religion in some way, or who has just really had a bad experience. Is like, no way, like I'm mad, I don't want to go, right? And furthermore, like, I'm offended if you want to go. Like, people say to you, like, you're a smart person, I can't believe, like, you would believe all that stuff. And you think, like, wow, you've got an NPR tote bag, and you talk like that about religion? Like, if you talked about any other group of people like that, you'd call yourself a bigot, but you talk to me like that? I mean, there is a way in which that group, by the way, is allowed to talk about religion in the most disrespectful manner. And let me just give you an example of that. Like, let's say I said to you, I want to tell you what's something really important to me, I had a really terrible experience in high school. And you know what? People in high school were mean to me. And I had teachers in high school who really didn't care whether I learned the subject or not. And I even had teachers who were like, yeah, I'll tell you how to do chemistry. Like, there's only one way to do chemistry. And they're like, yeah, you have to learn the periodic table. And I'm like, well, I was created understanding chemistry. Like, I'm a human being. And do you know what that did to my self-esteem, to be told, like, you have to learn chemistry? And in fact, I'll tell you something about that chemistry teacher. She gets paid to teach you chemistry. Like, how can you believe in high school? In fact, if you go back and look at human history, almost every war was caused by some leader who attended high school. And you're going to defend high school to me? Like, yeah, I'm offended that you would even want me to go to high school. Like, how dare you? And you're like, I didn't even invite you to go to high school. Never mind, like, high school shouldn't exist, right? If you talked like that, people would say that's insane. And if you said, like, everyone who went to high school is responsible for the wars, like, people would say, or if you said that about the people of France, if you said the French people are literal and fundamentalists, and they believe that other people are going to hell, and they think that anybody who's not French is going to hell, and they force their Frenchness, like, on you all the time. Like, they're always telling you how great France is. And, and they won't perform your wedding, and and they don't, I mean, you'd be like, how can you say that, like, about a whole group of people, right? We would say that is offensive. Like, there's a word for that. It's stereotyping. But people talk like that about religion and Christianity all the time. So that's the category of nuns who I would call the no way, right? Then there are the no longers, who are people who've just drifted. They're getting their latte, they're reading the New York Times, maybe they were injured by a church, but maybe they just sort of found it irrelevant and they stopped going and they didn't miss it that much, right? So they're not like enraged per se, they're just kind of like indifferent. And that's what I think was the kind of East Rock neighborhood, around my church, was like a lot of people just were sort of happily unchurched. But then increasingly, and these are often, I think, the kids of the parents who are in the first two categories, we have people who've never been exposed to any kind of religious community. And then we have those who've never been exposed and are open to it. That's what I call the not yets, right? The never have. And the amazing thing about the never haves is that they have actually not been injured by a church. So I'm like, give us time, we will get to you. Like, we will hurt you. I mean, because we allow human beings to be part of this effort, so we will hurt you. I mean, that's going to be true. But they haven't been injured. And a lot of what we talk about when we talk about church, I think, is directed toward the first two groups of the nuns. So when we say, oh, we're doing like a great job of welcoming the unchurched or the people without a church home, often we're talking to the first two groups. So like in my tradition, what we would do is we would say, we have this awesome church where like we're not like those other churches, like those bad mega churches, like where you have to like sit with all those thousands of people, like, we'll really focus on you. Like, we'll put you on a committee, it's like, you just had an experience of God. Like, okay, we'd like to have you serve on the administration committee. It's like, no, I just want to learn more about God and like, who is Jesus? Yeah, we'll get to that after you join the committee, because that's how it works around here. What about baptism? No, committee. Like, because you need to get to know us, right? And it's a very narcissistic thing, we want to suck the life out of you as a volunteer. Wait, I had an experience of the mystical divine when I was walking in the woods. Yeah, well, you're going to sit in the basement and teach Sunday school. Because that's how you respond to that call from God. Like, and then you're going to make sandwiches, And then you're going to do like what you do for a living. We're going to put you on a committee and you can do that here, because we're going to beat that out of you, that divine experience. But we say things like, yeah, we're not like those churches that won't ordain women, and to the group that's mad at the church, maybe that's big news, and they're like, oh, the church I'm mad at, like, didn't ordain women, and so that was all I wanted to hear, where do I sign up? Like, I didn't even know you existed, right? That doesn't happen very often with that group, because they've generally been injured, like, that's deep stuff, right? And we think if we can just be rational and say, we're not like those other churches where they tell you what to believe. But to the other two groups of nuns, the never have and the not yet, they kind of want to know what we believe. And they want to know what's involved. And if we respond to that by saying, we don't believe that anyone should tell you what to believe, and they're going to say, no, but like seriously, like I really want to know. Well, we're not like that other church that well, seriously, like, okay, then finally they're going to be like, tell me what that other church believes, and do I assume you believe the opposite? No, that would be like judgmental, Just come, like you'll really like the people. We have a lot of nice people. Like, wow, do you realize how obnoxious that sounds? Like, come to my church because we have nice people. Like, that is so awful to say. It implies like all the nice people at 10:30 a.m. are at First Congregational Church, and all the wicked mean people are in yoga class, like the hateful people. Like, because there's no nice people. Like, you have no nice people in your life. You should come to our church, right? Or we have a great choir, like I can sing in a choir somewhere else. We have a great youth program. Guess what? My kids are overscheduled. Like, does any of this actually matter to us? And so a lot of how we talk is as if we're talking to the first categories of nuns and not the second. And I think you see this in youth ministry all the time. I'll give you an example of that. Was a staff member showed the movie Jesus Camp, the documentary Jesus Camp, to the confirmation class. And for her, that was a liberating experience because she was somebody who had been a nun in that kind of first camp. Like she had been part of a very conservative church that told her she couldn't be a minister and sort of represented what was shown in the documentary. It's this documentary that sort of is like the excesses of that very judgmental and sort of scary Christianity. So she showed that to the kids like as a liberating moment. Like, see, we're not like that church, right? And there were a couple of kids who got it because they could make that contrast. But for a lot of kids, they were like, I didn't even know that church existed. And I'm traumatized by that. And like, I don't think I want to get confirmed anymore because that is out there. Like, that's an example, right, of something that makes sense to one group and no sense to another. And when she tried to explain, like, the reason I showed you that documentary was because we're not like that, they were like, our class time is really precious. And we just spent 2 hours, like, watching these really hateful people. Like, why would you show that to us if it wasn't important, So you see how that plays out. I think what people want and what we've got to step up to as a church that is reasonable, rigorous, and real. And let me just say what I mean by that increasingly. Reasonable, like you don't check your brain at the door, right? Like, let's not tell the kids something different than we tell their parents. Let's take the stuff we learn in Divinity school, and if it was useful and interesting to you, there's a way to talk to civilians about that. You're not going to read out loud from Von Rad but you can say, hello, like smart people in the pews, what you always suspected is true. Human beings put this stuff together. There was some inspiration, but there was also cultural forces, and that's why there's stuff in here that justifies slavery. And, that's not of God. Like, human beings put this thing together. And by the way, when they put it together in those early centuries and they had to decide like what books were going to make it in the Bible and what didn't, like, do you think they didn't notice that there were contradictions? Like, do you think we're the first generation of geniuses? To notice like these are different birth narratives for Jesus. What? Like, that got right by the early church. Like, they had to wait for 2015 for this genius, like in the 8th grade, to say, I'm not getting confirmed because I saw there were some discrepancies in the text. Like, what are we teaching them, And in some ways, I wish we did midrash and, to say like, this goes to the Reformation, but it goes to the early church. It goes to the Jewish background of people have always debated Scripture. They've always argued about what it means. And it may be that for you, the virgin birth makes sense in a beautiful, mysterious way, and we have room for that. But like, let's acknowledge that nowhere in Scripture does Jesus say, like, it's super important that you believe that my mother was a virgin. Let's just be reasonable about that. And let's do it with the kids, too. And then real. We've got to not be the happy, clappy church or the well-dressed church or the, you're only allowed to pray for, cancer in certain parts of the body. Like I'm not a big fan of getting into all the specific medical details because I sort of am under the impression that God knows already. But if you are going to do the organ recital, like let's give the penis equal time to the, like whatever the ailment is. I mean, if you're going to be specific in one area, but also let's be real. Let's talk about mental illness and pray. Let's be as brave about praying for somebody with depression as for somebody with cancer, right? Like, let's get rid of this weird little hierarchy of ailments that you can pray for, and let's do the real stuff. And there's so many examples of that, but you know what I'm talking about. Rabbis, which was fascinating, and that delighted me. Like I really don't care if you become a Christian. I care that you have a religious community, and I would define that as being something maybe older and bigger than you are, right? And I think that's important. And I don't think you're going to go to hell because of that, but I can testify that I think my life is different because of that, and I can share that with you. And that's the kind of thing we've got to be talking about with these nuns. It's not good enough to say we have an excellent choir. Last little anecdote. Just remember I told you my daughter was attending the rival evil youth group, She ended up telling me a story years later. She came back, and she said there was one meeting where the pastor there was speaking, and this represented the views, of that congregation about the importance of in your dating years dating a Christian, and how important it was to find a Christian to date because later you were going to get married, and you didn't want to end up somebody who wasn't Christian. So, of course, she raised her hand and said, well, that seems ridiculous. Like, we don't believe that. Like, where'd you get that? And so then the pastor said, well, statistically, like, interfaith marriages generally are very unhappy and, like, end in divorce or something. Yeah. And so I said, wow, Abigail, like, what did you say to that? And she said, well, I spoke up. And I said, I'm proud of you. What'd she say? And she says, well, I told him about how my dad was Jewish. And I said, wow, that's incredible because your dad is not Jewish. And she said, yeah, but it was like such an awesome comeback. I was like, my mom's a Christian minister, and my dad is Jewish. And I was like, Abigail, I know those pastors. Like, now they know your mom's a Christian minister, and you're a little liar. Like, and you lied in church. Like, don't even get me started. So what have I learned from youth and about youth as relates to the church? I think in a lot of times, teenagers and particularly middle schoolers are like the canary in the coal mine. They are alert to things that are happening in our culture that are broken and wrong, and they haven't yet had that bravery to express it beaten out of them, right? And they notice stuff. And like a seventh grader, when they feel pain and anguish, like it's real, right? And so that middle school kind of time, but also seniors' highs. And I think we need to hear from kids. And so I really am in favor of kids being involved in worship leadership and other things. And I think often we think we have to please the kids. So let's get music that the kids will like. And it's like, do you not remember being in high school? You didn't all like the same music. We're all different, just like the adults, you know? And so don't tell me one generation is going to be happy because you have this particular musical setup, right? But a better model would be, let's invite the kids to do music in church. And then if they're a clarinet player or they play the electric guitar or they want to sing a song that they've composed, that's how, things change, right? And I've learned that a lot of our youth feel like they're not heard, but I think at the other hand, they're heard a lot, and that is draining. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you think. Express yourself. And at some level, that gets exhausting. And you see that sometimes in church where they're like, really? Do I have to, form my own opinion about everything? Or could I, learn something here? And it is fascinating that often, we have confirmation Q&A, this one thing where the parents and the mentors and the confirmands all get to ask the clergy any question they want. And it's amazing how the adults always take it over because they have so many questions, right? So we're doing catechesis, for confirmands, but you're always doing, whenever you're teaching the kids, you're teaching the adults who are the teachers, and a lot of them want to teach because they don't feel like they learned that stuff in the first place. But at the Q&A, you have to say, adults, could you please stop and let the kids ask questions? And I'm always surprised, invariably every year, there's a kid who says, what do you think about premarital sex, right? And they know that their opinions are valued. They really want to know. And I always say in the United Church of Christ, we believe that the associate minister answers that question. Yeah. No, but they care about that stuff, but they want to know what you think, right? And they know that if you said what you think, it doesn't mean that you're condemning them. And here's something I was wrong about entirely, too. On our staff, they really want to do this Our Whole Lives sexuality curriculum for kids, and I thought, this is a horrible idea. I was like, I don't want to talk about it. Even just at staff meeting, I'd be like, oh, I can't hear you. It's awkward, right? So wrong about that. That's been such a congregation-changing program. And again, the best youth ministry is ministry to the whole congregation, and so the adult leaders and everybody's affected by this. And now we're all talking about issues of sexuality in a way that is more reasonable and real. So the last thing I've noticed is that kids, contrary to popular belief, are deeply concerned about technology. They're the canary in that coal mine as well. And whenever they preach or we give them a chance to do testimonies and express themselves, technology is always a theme, and it's how to have some distance from it and how to have real conversations and the temptations of it and the struggles of it. And when they're really honest, the ones they are worried about with it are their parents. Because I'm finding that the young people I hear from have a sense of the dangers, and the parents are the ones who can't stop checking the emails at dinner, right? And so when we say let's put the cell phones away, they might howl, but they know that there's something real there in a way that my generation, they consider us to be kind of hopelessly naive about it. And a lot of what they talk about is the adult behavior around it. So that's what I've learned from youth and about youth. I'm sorry that I wasn't smart enough to study it when I was here, but I thank all of you who do this work and for the ministry you do, not for the youth of the church, not for the future of the church, for every age and generation that is shaped by the ministry that you do, because we are never just ministering to one group. It is always to the people in front of us and also with that mighty cloud of witnesses that has gone before. Thank you.